Grow CFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using Grow CFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today at growcfo.net. Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and today I've got Oliver Lee, the CFO at Flashpack, with me. Welcome to the Grow CFO show, Oliver.
Thanks, Kevin. Delighted to be here.
Oliver, tell me a little bit about you.
Yeah, great question, Kevin. Great question to start. So a little bit about me. So interesting fact I always start with is I'm a dual citizen of the UK and US through marriage. And so very familiar with both sides of the pond, so to say. Yeah, I originally started, just a quick rundown of kind of my career today. I originally started out at KPMG in audit, did a variety of different roles between audit and transaction services, both here and the US, which was super interesting. And then managed to finally get my teeth into the startup world, which I was desperate to do for many years while I was in the audit and the transaction service world. In 2018, I joined a company called Nested in the UK in London. Did a few months there. Unfortunately, that one didn't quite work out. I'd hoped and dreamed. And you know what they say, when something doesn't maybe quite work out, there's always a reason for it. And that landed me on with the role at Flashpack back in 2019.
Brilliant. And I want to concentrate a little bit and talk about your role at Flashpack and what happened. I think really interesting that you join a company that specializes in travel, a fledgling company in the startup world, just as COVID hits and travel becomes impossible.
That's right. Yeah. So I've entered the startup world at the middle to end of 2018. That hasn't quite worked out in the first role when I joined Flashpack. And so this is May 2019 at this point. I'm like ready to get stuck in, raring to go. The company has grown really rapidly between 17, 18 and 2019. A small amount of angel investment, bootstrapped by a husband and wife team, Lee and Rada. Amazing growth, actually. The revenue was over 20 million at this time. And so from nothing to 20 million in 3 or 4 years is quite impressive. We're about to go out to more. We do go out to market for a Series A at the back end of 2019, going into 2020. And as we know, fast forward to sort of February, March, we start seeing bookings tanking, certainly in Asia first. And so Jan-Feb 2020, we're out to market to raise funds. And basically the global economy starts shutting down from east to west. And so by March 2020, we don't really have any more offers on the table. And it's full survival mode.
Okay. So tell me a little bit before we go and talk about picking your way out of that crisis. What exactly does Flashpack do?
So Flashpack, we are a group tour operator that specializes in solo travelers aged between 30 and 49. And so essentially what we do is we have about 60 or so adventure products. Each itinerary we have designed on a customized basis, and they're all over the world. And we take up to 14 solo travelers from mainly the UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. They're our main source markets. And we put them together on these trips, these amazing trips all over the world. And the best thing is the group dynamic and how we see huge uptake in the number of friendships that people have made on these tours is quite incredible. And they're very long.
I love the tagline that you're trying to make 1 million friendships through travel.
And that's right. And look, we really practice what we preach. We're definitely not just a travel company. Whilst that is, I would see that more as our vessel or our medium or our platform to create these amazing connections right now. And so you see it in all the feedback forms, and we don't have to hand the exact number, but it's a high number of percentage of people keep in regular contact with one another post-trip and then come back for more.
Okay, so it's very much targeted at a very, very specific niche. Single
Absolutely.
people in 30s and 40s, probably when all the big travel companies are aiming family holidays at that market.
There's that. And I would actually go a step further and say I definitely would use the word solo over single. And the reason being, we actually do have quite a few people that are either in relationships or married going on trips. And so isn't just single people, interestingly enough. And to your point, it's definitely serving an underserved niche in terms of how kind of marketing messages by major companies are sold to people in their 30s and 40s, which, as you've touched on, very typically tends to be around families quite often, or marriage or partners.
Yeah. Okay. Great company, seeing a great market opportunity. Oh, it's heavily bootstrapped with some angel investors. And suddenly everything falls through the floor. This isn't investors' money that's suddenly going missing. This is owners' money that's going missing. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, so let's go back to 2020 then. So March the 13th, Friday, I believe it was as well.
Friday the
That's
13th.
when
Couldn't have a better day.
It was. I believe that was when the UK and Donald Trump, from memory, it was that or the week after when Donald Trump shut the US down too.
Yeah.
I remember him doing it. And that was almost like the final nail in the inevitable coffin in terms of the confidence, the consumer confidence was done. It was gone. And so there were still little bits of, it might only last a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And when those kind of decisions get made, this is probably going to be a bit of a longer time than a week or two. And so reality sets in, okay? And then you go into full wartime mode. Not that you weren't already. I mean, we already were in wartime mode, but you go into absolute overdrive of wartime CFO mode. And obviously, I like to say that I don't think it's ever good if finance is running a business. I don't particularly necessarily see that as a positive, actually, in my opinion.
But at this particular point, an awful lot of businesses started being run by finance because
correct.
Cash became absolute king.
Correct. So then what you're doing, you're essentially doing that. You're pulling out your playbook. Although this was an extreme playbook, I would argue. Furlough comes in. You furlough almost everybody. You do everything you can. You delay all supply payments and just review everything in detail. You basically you are battening down the hatches in every sense of the word with every kind of cost you can imagine, because revenue is zero. I mean, there is none, zero revenue. And at the same time, you're thinking of, okay, how am I going to get some capital into the business? Because it's not going to come from customers. It's not going to come from bookings. So how are we going to do that? And so you go on this journey of trying to basically find solvent solutions for the business, because essentially if you don't, you are essentially, you are insolvent. So you go and try and find solvent solutions. You try every avenue you can imagine. And once those are exhausted, and in that time, the confidence did not come back in 2020 at all with travel. Zero confidence came back. It wasn't like by June or July, confidence was returning in travel. It was not in 2020. 2021 is very different, but 2020, it was not. And so I think you name it, competitors or investors, everybody was on fire. Everybody was on serious fire. And so even though I'd argue it was the biggest time of opportunity for people that could see beyond that 2 to 3 month period, not many people would. In fact, no one I really came across was really thinking that way. And so, yeah, it was a difficult time. And I guess that probably leads on to the next phase, right?
Yep. So, next phase.
So, what was the next phase? The next phase was, unfortunately for the business back then, was administration, which is obviously a painful thing to have to go through and have to even contemplate, to be honest with you. But once you've contemplated, then obviously going through it then becomes, I guess, a matter of process almost. And so when you get over the hurdle of, okay, this is going to happen, it's like, okay, what next? And so Lee and Rada, the two founders, the husband and wife founders, they've been very transparent actually about all of this and how difficult that was. Obviously, it was their business from day one. It was their idea in 2014 or 2015 on their first date together. It was their baby. And as their baby is suddenly going into administration. I mean, that is a huge psychological challenge for anyone. Then it was about, once that psychological kind of hurdle has been accepted or come to terms with as much as you can, it's about process then, right? And so obviously it goes to administration and you do your best, which all you can do is bid on the assets of administration. That's all you can do. And so that's what happened. And they were the highest bidders at the time. As I said, there was no confidence in travel, zero confidence in travel. And so if that was to happen in a steady state environment, it would be a very different process, I'm sure. But back in 2020, this was October time, I think, November time, 2020, very different landscape. And so luckily enough, they were able to bid on the assets and get them back.
Which can't have been easy.
No.
Because I imagine they've pretty much sunk every penny they've got.
Yes, correct. 100%.
So where's the cash coming from to buy the assets?
Well, exactly. And Rada and Lee have been very transparent publicly about that. They had to beg, borrow and steal, I think, from everybody they could in terms of family and friends. And so it was a very tough time. And I'll throw another spanner in the works. My first daughter was born in October. So there I am, helping where I can to business plan, forecast, help wherever I can with that. My daughter's born, no job. Because the company's gone, right? The company's gone to administration October, November time. So there's no payroll. That's gone. And so there I am with, no job, newborn, COVID, lockdowns. It's like, oh, what next? So, yeah.
Yeah, but you're still there, a flashback now. So you saw it out and you've seen the story all the way through. So we've got owners who have fixed, still and borrowed. You with no job. So value at the moment of the organization is a big round zero.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, so how then from absolute zero do we go about growing the value of this business?
Yeah, really good question. Thanks for the segue. So we fast forward a few more months and we go into sort of early 2021 now. And we've got a new co, and we've got an institutional backer who believes in the vision, the original vision of the company, which hasn't really actually fundamentally changed that much. It's still the same big vision, the million friendships, etc. We basically get back to work. Let's be simple. We get back to work. So we fast forward to May 2021. I remember it very well. 17th of May 2021, I get back on payroll. And so this is 6 or 7 months later. I'm like, okay, we're back. Let's do this. And we go about, it was funny because obviously I'm a finance professional. And for the first few months, what am I doing? I'm helping create trips. I mean, who would have thought it, right? There's a problem with the finance person's making trips. Anyway, so joking aside, I basically spent probably more of that time the first few months because we were hibernating as far as the customers were concerned. We were rebuilding behind the scenes. And so what we needed to do, it was just all the basics from setting up some basic systems all the way to creating our products again, ready for sale, ready to do a launch on the day, 1 year anniversary of the administration. That was the plan. And so we hired 2 or 3 of our old staff members back. We obviously knocked our heads together. We put together these, I think we launched with 16 tours. We got the website re-energized. We rebuilt little bits of the reservation systems. And I did all the negotiations directly with the suppliers, which was pretty fun actually at the time. Got some great prices for us. And then we relaunched, I think it was November the 4th, I'm going to say, 2021, with 16 adventure products. And it went nuts.
Did you have a problem with those suppliers that's going into administration?
Yeah,
you must have owed those suppliers money.
Great question. Yep, some we did. And I think it's a testament. I think 95% plus of all our suppliers came over with us. And that's a testament to the relationships we have pre-COVID anyway. And number 2, the vision and the opportunity that we can provide our suppliers with. And so both of those are so compelling that it wasn't actually too hard to convince most to come over. We care deeply about both our customers and our suppliers. And so the founders spent a lot of time with their customers through the whole journey. And obviously we spent a lot of time with suppliers as well. All that way through sort of November, December, January, February, like really bringing them on that story and that journey as well. Because like I said, we've been fairly transparent about the whole process from the start. And so really getting them into the sort of vision of where we're what's next, basically.
Yeah. So lesson 1 in growing back the value of the business and expanding the value of the business is great relationships with suppliers.
I think that's a great lesson for business generally, right? I think relationships are everything in business generally, and that could be any stakeholder we're talking about. But yeah, in this instance, of course, there was still other stakeholders too. I mean, it was still even some of the old employees as well, bringing them back. It's another relationship that was important. You're right, the suppliers that she touched on, the customers, absolutely imperative as well. Really important that we kept good relationships with a lot of our customers who had obviously maybe paid deposits in the old co, and so we try and make them whole where we could and things like that. So there was loads of things we did along the way to basically keep relationships strong where we could.
So you've bought the assets out of administration. A year later, you're going for this big launch and you're putting these trips together. So there's a need for some extra capital there. This is more than just buying the assets back. So how do you fund that first bit of getting back on your feet again?
Yeah, that's where basically we had some institutional investor come on board. And that was Q2 21. So that was about May, June time. They came on board and they gave us like a small kind of Series A, late seed Series A investment, basically. And that was enough basically to not only turn the lights back on, as we used to call it back then, it was almost rebooting. That definitely needed an element of capital to reboot. It was then actually to take us to the first phase of growth, which was basically, in our minds, it was largely, can we get back to close to where we were in 2019? And that's basically what that tranche was designed for back in 2021.
So clear lesson 2 is make sure there's funding there, stable funding that gets you ready for the growth.
Get on board, exactly. 1, stable funding. 2, a partner that believes in you.
Yeah.
Which they clearly did, right? Because they're investing in a company that, look, I mean, we're the management team. We're obviously very confident we have conviction in our opinions on whether it's going to come back or not. We were very confident, but you needed a backer and you needed people behind you that would also share and believe in that, not just by going, yeah, cool, we believe in it. They actually put their money where their mouth is. And that's the big difference between people.
Yeah. And I suppose one big advantage here is you've got a management team with a proven track record right up to 2020. They knew what they were doing. They knew the market. They were growing a business quite aggressively. And the reason that it all fell apart was effectively an act of God.
Well, 100%. And I think that's proven also by the fact that we go back to the end of 2019, start of 2020, when we were doing the Series A in the old company, the kind of investor quality that was coming to the table and knocking the doors down to get to chat to the founders was high. It was all the reputable names you could think in the VC market. They were all knocking, they were all speaking. And there were also partner interviews and everything. So they weren't kind of there were higher level conversations going on and people were very keen to get involved. And so there's something special here, really.
Yeah. So lesson 3, great management team, great track record, great reputation.
Great reputation. Yeah, exactly. And like you said, look, like everyone in life, right? It proof's in the pudding. And I think that you can evidence that through, the growth from 2017 to 2019 is very impressive.
So you joined as finance manager and you're now CFO.
Yep.
So that sounds to me as though you possibly joined at a level below your ability to begin with.
Yeah, so I just entered startup world 6 or 8 months before I joined Flashback. And as I said, unfortunately, the company I worked for didn't work out. My role, the way it all worked out, wasn't exactly how I'd hoped. However, I learned a hell of a lot from that. And I think in life, you learn what you like and you learn what you don't like. And I think they're equally as important, I would argue. So everyone puts a preface on what they like, but I think you should also put preface on what you don't like. So I learned a lot through that. And so when I was already actively looking, even before my role finished at the first job, I decided I cared largely about, of course, the opportunity, 100%, but about the environment and the culture and the mentality and the team you work with. It's these kind of intangibles that are hard to put a number on, per se. I really started to care more about. And I think as you get older, you do as well. And so
yes.
I just became very aware, having left the accounting world, which I've been at 3 or 4 accounting firms. They are different, but they're the same. That's my opinion. I think they are definitely different and there are nuances, and often it's process or policy, but the work's the same. And I think the mentality is very similar, my opinion. So that's a shock to then go into startup world. I think that's possibly why it was a bit of a shock. The whole thing was just a lot. And so then I started to learn, okay, I know what I like and what I don't like right now. And so Flashback's job, I saw it and I was like, do you know what? I think I can knock this out of the park. I think I'll do a good job. Possibly wish I was higher than what they're offering. It is what it is. I'm not happy where I am. It's the one I've been most attracted out of all the roles. Let's just go for it. So I went for it and then it worked out, got the job, started in May time 2019. And then I think August, September, I was made head of finance quickly. So it was great as well, because what's good about Flashback is you get back what you put in. Like you really do get back what you put in. And I think I am the poster child for that, Flashback, actually. You really if you just put in the work, you do get back what you put in.
I think that's a good message for anybody moving up in the sort of startup finance world. You do definitely get back what you put in. In my mind, now, if you want that first CFO role, startup world is probably a very good place to get it, because you'll go in and yes, you'd be head of finance to start off with, but you'll get exposure to all of the things that the CFO would do, possibly initially without the job title. But as things progress, that's where you will end up.
So making the transition from public accounting into the startup scale-up world, I think public accounting prepares you with really strong foundations, such as integrity, high standards of integrity, very, very high technical ability and knowledge. However, I think where the nuances and where the challenges then come as you progress into startup scale-ups, it's all of the intangibles that come with that. And so I'll give you an example would be when you're in accounting, it's very easy to take a client, we call them clients then, don't we? So it's like take a client's work and go, that number's not good enough, or that number's not right, that margin's not high enough. Very easy to say that. The difference when you're on the other side is, okay, it's not good enough, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to change that number? How are you going to influence that number? And it isn't a case of just, hey guys, make that better. Doesn't work that way in practice, as we all probably on the other side know, right? And so big differences on how you communicate to different stakeholders within an organization that are not finance people. And I'm a huge believer in demystifying finance jargon internally. I'm definitely not a big jargon talker of finance internally. And so again, goes back to what we talked about earlier in the podcast, relationships, building relationships with internal stakeholders. And if you want to be able to sing to the finance tune or play the finance tune, then you need to educate them on that. And you need to educate them on what that means and how it works. And so I think it's a steep learning curve when people make that transition. And so it's an interesting point about if you take a step back, when in your career, if you're in accounting to start, should you actually make that move? Because that takes definitely a bit of time to learn the ropes of how that works, all those nuances.
So you're going through that kind of change Okay, you've done a little bit of it in Nested, but you're now in Flashback, and the business situation is pretty dire. We've gone into building the new organization up. So how far out of your comfort zone were you?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Back in 2020, very out of my comfort zone. I think to make a leap in the career or personal development, quite often that is the way to do it. It is to be put out your comfort zone. However, one key thing for me as an individual, which may apply to other people too, is having the confidence of the people above and around you is key for me. If I have the confidence of the people, it breathes straight into, I take it in straight away and I feel very confident myself. I definitely needed that. I needed that to know that was there. And then I felt I was unstoppable is a strong word, but I felt like I could do anything then. I felt really confident in my own ability to then go, well, look at yourself in the mirror. You've gone through training. You've been in accounting for 8, 9, 10 years. You've been in the US. You've been in the UK. You've done audit. You've done transactions. You've done a lot of the foundational stuff. You have confidence. Now go and execute it. Go and make decisions. Don't go and ask for this or that. Make the decisions and or advised. And so that's where I've felt the most learning in the last 3 or 4 years is that type of stuff. It's just, you're the expert here. You're the subject matter expert. Advise the CEO or the founders, advise them. If they don't like the advice or they don't agree with the advice, they'll tell you. That's what you're there for. You're not there to be asking. And that sounds an obvious thing, right? And for CFO, it is. But when you're like a manager, then a head of finance or whatever, it isn't obvious actually. And I see that in talent now as well, that that's pieces of advice I would definitely give is take the lead, own it, things like that.
Yeah. So definitely, again, if we come back to growing the value of the business, finance has to take a lead. You've got to go out there. You've got to get people on board with the numbers. And you've got to be, I think, making decisions is the key thing. This isn't about reporting the numbers. Nope. This is about looking into the future and saying, as you rightly said a few minutes ago, oh, that margin, that number isn't good enough. It needs to be a different number. It's the step beyond. So how do we achieve the different number?
Exactly. And the only way you're going to achieve it is collaborating and working in partnership with other people in the business. We love spreadsheets, but spreadsheets don't move the numbers. And so that's where it comes in, is the partnering. And if you want to go to the next step, which obviously is a very key difference between, I don't know, a head of finance or finance manager, and then when you move up to like VPs and CFO roles, is storytelling.
Yes.
What's the story behind those numbers? Why did they do that? What does that then mean for the future? What's the story? Why are we doing it? Why are we making that investment? Why are we letting margin go higher or lower in the medium term? What's the plan? What's the strategy behind doing that? And why does it make sense? And
absolutely,
that is also another phase of the last 2 or 3 years that I've had to learn a lot about, basically. And so no one really can necessarily prepare. You have to learn by doing to a point. There's a lot there. It's a lot of nuances, I think, from head of finances to them directors and then to CFOs. It certainly isn't, a lot of it isn't technical, is what I'm saying. A lot of it is not technical.
A lot is soft skills.
It's soft skills. Yeah. It's soft skills and relationship building. Soft skills in itself.
Yeah. So you said earlier that the initial goal was to get the company back to where it was in 2019. That was the wartime phase.
It was.
Get things back, get to where they were in 2019. So I presume that's something that is already a box that's ticked.
Box ticked, yeah.
How long did it take you?
Great question. Well, we can get really financial. We could talk about run rates, but it took us, let me just think back. It took us in earnest, not much more than a year.
Really?
No, not much more. Not on a run rate basis. No.
That's pretty impressive because I guess there was still a culture around for a while that folk weren't traveling.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't really go live until the end of 21 for bookings. For departures starting in 22. And so if you remember at the end of 2021, there was the nasty strain of Omicron, which definitely just paused confidence for a few weeks, which on the scale of things is no big deal. But at the time felt very painful for us because we just launched. And we're like, oh, November was great. December's not as good. What? And it was Omicron. And then by January, it was gone again. And so it really was a blip on the radar, like we thought 2020 was going to be quite frank. So yeah, we on a run rate basis, we're back within sort of 12 to 15 months. Yeah. Really quick. The team did a great job, to be honest with you. And again, so only as strong as the team, right? The team did an awesome job.
So you won the war. You're back to where you were.
Mini battle, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah. So the wartime CFO's got to now turn into the peacetime CFO and take the business on rather than the emergency, let's bail ourselves out of a hole, into a how do we grow and increase the value of this business longer term. So now you're back to where you were before. How do you go about it? What's the next step in increasing that value?
I'll tell you, the hardest part of that is mindset shift, for sure. And so when I say we, I'm talking about myself and the two founders, we are quite openly scarred from 2020. Like, I won't hide that. It was very painful. And I think any good leader or person, you have to look in the mirror and go, what could I have done better? What could I have done differently? Right. And say, like, what will I not do next time? However, you've got to be careful. You don't go too far the other way. And I think there was probably a period of time, and I can only really speak for myself here on this podcast, where I probably went too far the other way, as in too nervous, too cautious, too prudent. And that sounds funny coming from a finance professional, but you can definitely be too prudent, for sure. And so what do I mean in reality by too prudent? I mean placing little bets, placing bigger bets on investments into things, whether it be hiring certain people, whether it be spending on this marketing campaign, whether it be doing that, doing this. Oh, sounds risky. It's like, well, we're in a startup. That's partly the name of the game, within reason, is taking calculated risks.
Yes.
And so I think for the first year or so, probably negatively impacted me personally a little bit on a few areas where, if I look back now, I probably would have done slightly different things. I was too reserved, a little too risk averse in some areas. And so the hardest part was to get back into growth mode, was literally making that mindset shift from batten down the hatches, wartime. Oh, take a breath. We've saved the business. We've got a second chance. We're restarting the business. Oh, but that capital in the bank, let's not drain it too quickly. Let's be prudent with it, right? I've never had capital like this in the business for a long time. Let's be smart with it. And so there's being smart, and there's also being too risk averse. And so I think it was a mindset shift, which just took a bit of time, really, rather than anything else. It just took a bit of time to get COVID in the rearview mirror, which was probably within another 6 months of a year, certainly from launch. By mid-22, it was definitely in the rearview mirror by then.
So I guess at this point, you've got a choice that says, we've got some existing markets. We could expand those existing markets with new products, new things that we want to do, or we've got this very niched business, mostly operating in the UK. We could take this elsewhere in the globe. So where do you go to get that real next level of growth?
So even in Flashpack, we call it Flashpack 1.0. So the iteration before COVID, and now we're in Flashpack 2.0. So Flashpack 1.0 still had a really strong global audience. And what I mean by that is mainly North America, Australia, New Zealand, UK and Europe. They're our main kind of like hotbeds of source market of customers. And so we definitely thought about that a lot during the COVID downtime and stuff like that, about how does that mix look longer term. And I think right now we definitely see the most sort of excitement from a growth perspective from the US. And I think there's a few things to unpack within the US. There is firstly the travel opportunity. As we know, I think the US is often seen as the holy grail in terms of the Western markets, in terms of if you can crack the US, you've got a very good sized business there, and that's very widely accepted. So there's that. Then there's the travel size of the US, and the mentality shift, I think, or the perception shift of Americans traveling is changing. We don't see that Americans say don't all have passports anymore. Anyone that's open-minded in their 20s, 30s and 40s, they have passports. Trust me, they have passports. So that is that's not a misnomer. Facts are the facts, but it's definitely, you've got to get into the data, and actually Americans do travel. That is not true, they don't travel. And even if only 30% did, look out, that's big, that's much bigger than the UK is. And so that you've got to put it in perspective. And then number three, the group tour concept that we currently use as our kind of vessel for this friendship connection mission, it's not really a well-trodden or a well-developed product in the US, group tours. Group tours have been around for decades in the UK and Australia, decades and decades. There's plenty of incumbents in the market who've been doing this from, brochure times in the 80s and 90s, basically, and now obviously online. So there's just a huge opportunity over there, right? And so a lot of it is awareness building as well outweigh when you go out to the US in terms of educating them on the actual concept of a group tour itself and why that's an appealing concept.
So we're in a situation that we've gone from this horrendous event, the business worth absolutely nothing at all. We've built it back to where it was in 2019 with the help of some investors. We're now seeing these huge market opportunities, particularly in the US. Sounds like very exciting times. So is there another fundraise coming up?
Yeah, actually, we did close another fundraise in 2023. And so we had follow on from the existing, plus brought on a new investor in end of summer 2023. So only about 9 months ago that closed. And so what was the purpose of that? The purpose of that was partly US, sure. We're obviously investing quite a lot into technology as well behind the scenes right now. And so the main two use of funds are around that. And then, and just being able to, obviously, it's always nice when you're a finance professional, especially, to just have a little bit of, headroom in there to take advantage of opportunities that will probably inevitably arise, especially as you start scaling. You start seeing a lot of opportunities, whether it be not necessarily in the M&A space at this stage, but certainly just other areas, whether it be talent as well. Like, I think the talent market is extremely different to 2 or 3 years ago in terms of, in a good way, from an employer. There's a lot of great talent on the market right now in different areas that we often like to take investments with because we think it can accelerate our growth.
Yeah, so lots and lots of talent out there. Now that's an interesting one, because I still hear a lot of firms that are still trying to recover from that sort of great resignation.
There's that. There's also the great redundancy, I would argue, as well, that's happened in the last couple of years in different areas of the tech economy. I think there's been a lot of people that have cut back. I think, look, if we take a step back, right, Flashpack, we were envious of everybody in 2020 and 2021 when you used to see these huge Series A and Series B funding rounds going on at ridiculous valuations, both here and the US, into business models that unfortunately haven't probably come to fruition in 2023, 2024 and onwards. And so those type of companies, without naming obviously sectors, have probably had to right size those businesses, because there's question marks on some of them, obviously, whether they can ever be profitable, let alone want to burn the kind of money they were burning. And so a combination of kind of that and just general economic conditions, I think the talent market is, I think, from what we're seeing, quite strong right now. And so, as I've learned from COVID, if you're ever in a position of strength, even though things sometimes might not feel right, you should take advantage of things where you can. And so, it's always great if you can certainly see the salaries line as an investment in some areas. Like, I know a lot of people in finance see salaries line as a cost, and it is a cost, absolutely. But actually, what is that cost going to yield? And if you look at it from that perspective, you can make certain investments into talent and people to take you to the next level of growth.
That's a very, very good lesson in value, in increasing the value of your business. Invest in the right people. And
hardest part of business, Kevin.
Too much that is all running around the original two owners. You've got a lot more people these days. That's
right. Yeah, we are around 90 now.
Yeah.
And so, a lot more than when we first started 2.5 to 3 years ago. But people. It is the hardest to get right, I would say.
And you've got a business model that was put together from scratch second time round, with all the lessons coming from what Company 1.0 looked like before administration, and built in the hardest market possible.
That's right.
Advantages come from that you've made it lean, you've made it good, you've made it fit for purpose.
No, that's right. There was a lot of lessons, like I said, from 1.0 to Flashback 2.0. And one of them definitely was around people. And just to dig into that just for 30 seconds might be quite useful, actually. So I'll give you a couple of real high-level lessons we learned. Firstly, square pegs in square holes. Sounds obvious.
Yes.
It isn't always obvious. And it isn't always possible in an early-stage business, because you can afford what you can afford. And so you can't get specialists.
Yeah.
You get generalists. And then what happens as the company grows, it outgrows generalists quicker than it outgrows specialists. And so big lesson there, square pegs, square holes. Secondly, put in place a very clear performance and progression framework, if you can do, early on. It's hard to shoehorn that in at 60, 70, 80, 100 people, because people have got relationships, cliques, everything's becoming bigger and less control. And so as it's scaling, it's got no framework, and then you're shoehorning a framework in. And so people don't know what good looks like, or don't know what level am I? Why are they paid more? Why are they paid less? And then lastly on that, the last piece to this that we decided to go for is transparent pay. And we're fully transparent all the way up to director level.
Wow.
In the company, it's fully transparent. It's very clear. The levels are clear. The salaries are defined. It's clear how to move between them. And we put that in at 12 people or 15 people. And so again, it will evolve, it will adapt accordingly, and it will improve. And V2 is coming soon, and V3 and V4, and it will keep improving. But it was really important to put these type of things in early, so at least something is there and can be iterated on, rather than having nothing there. So this just summarizes, I think, the thoughts on people. Certainly the thoughts we have on it anyway.
Yeah, that is absolutely fascinating. I'm sure, although we could go on talking, for another 30 minutes on this, but I think we're rapidly running out of time here. So can I ask one last thing? We've talked a lot about the company and that growth. So just in finishing off, Oliver, where do you see you in 3 years' time?
From a personal perspective, I'm a big learner. I love learning. Just love taking everything to the next phase. And I think when you then layer that in with Flashback, it would be definitely going on the scaling journey. Like, I think the startup journey is the 0 to 1, which is tough in itself, but actually what's the 1 to 2, the 2 to 3? And there's a lot within that. And I would love to sit here in 3 years going, yep, I did it. I went through the scaling journey and took us, whether that's an exit or not an exit, let's see. But certainly take us through the scaling journey.
And I'd love to have you back as a guest in maybe 2 years or 3 years' time and talk about that scaling journey.
Brilliant, Kevin. I'd love to.
Oliver, thank you very much for being this week's guest on the Grow CFO Show.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Kevin.
Brilliant.